Well, welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm so excited that you've joined us and so excited to go through the content with you. And our focus today is really about unity. You know, the church is called to unity, but many churches really are more divided than ever today. And this puts pastors and church leaders in a position where they're having to lead divided churches. So today's webinar is focused on addressing this challenge. And among other things, we're going to address how can churches reach and minister to diverse mission fields? How can we experience unity when there's so much division in our world? How can pastors shift their teaching to actually encourage unity? And how can churches break through the noise of all the social media and news and things that are in our faces 24/7? So today we have some great panelists. We're joined by Tony Morgan, and Tony is the founder and the lead strategist of the Unstuck group, which really over the last 12 years has served more than 500 churches throughout the United States, Canada, and several other countries around the world. So Tony, if you can just say hello to everybody.
Yeah, it's good to be with you, Amy, and it's good to be with you as well, and especially around this particular topic, because I've heard from so many of you that this is really a challenging issue that you're dealing with in your ministry. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this conversation today.
And before we introduce our next panelist, just a quick note to all of you that are participating in this webinar today. We have a live chat that's going where you can submit your questions, and then we'll respond in real time to answer some of those questions. And so someone from our team will be answering those questions via chat and capturing those questions. And the ones we can't get to, by the way, we'll just use for future content to address those. And if you get the chance, we'd love for you to share this conversation on Twitter and Facebook. You can use hashtag #UnstuckChurch. And Tony, as much as I would love to introduce the next panelist, I would actually like you to introduce our guest for today's conversation.
So, Amy, thank you for giving me the opportunity to introduce our other panelists today. And the reason I wanted to do that is because it's my pastor. You may not know it, but my home church here in Atlanta is North Point Community Church. We've been engaged there in the ministry for a number of years. That's where my family attends, but it's also where I'm serving. We're plugged into a small group, and we love our church because of the mission that it's on. The mission at North Point, it's all about reaching people for Jesus. In fact, specifically, we want to inspire people to follow Jesus by engaging them in the life and the mission of the church. Not just people who are Democrats, not just people who are Republicans, but we're trying to reach all people. And because of that, the church has to be unified. We have to be pulling together to accomplish this mission that God's called us to. And through the last couple of years, I've been watching my pastor, Andy Stanley, lead strong in this season and really bring people together so that we can hopefully bring our community together as well. And I invited Andy a few weeks ago to join us for today's conversation. For those that don't know him, Andy Stanley is the founder of North Point Ministries, which he founded back in 1995. He's also written more than 20 books, and he has some great thoughts to share on today's topic. So let's jump to my conversation with Andy Stanley.
Andy, first of all, thanks for meeting with us today. And I picked a tough topic. I hope you're up for this. Yeah. And it's coming out of what I've experienced. I think you've been in ministry a little longer than I have. But the season that we've been through, it just feels like there's more division in the church that I've ever experienced in my lifetime. So what's your perspective?
Yeah, I agree. And you and I are old enough to remember when the modern church movement started. So there was division between churches, like, oh, we like this style, so that was one thing. But the division we're experiencing now is within local churches. It's not churches divided from churches. It's people within the church being divided from each other. And no, I've never seen anything like this. I in the past, people have left because they didn't like sermons, they didn't like worship style.
That happens to you too?
Yeah, of course, right. It's too loud, it's too soft. There's a cooler church in town. I mean, those kinds of things, they're not fun, but you just go, oh, well, and, our church is 26 years old, and from time to time, a family would leave. I'm talking about before this current stuff going on. And I'd say, hey, you I've been preaching to you and your family for 15 years or 10 years. You need another voice. I get it. But that's not division. Those are people, coming and going, or people have different preferences or styles, or their teenagers get connected to another church. And I say, yeah, you got to go to church with your teenagers. But the division within local churches, I've never seen anything like it. And obviously, it's the combination of several things. the COVID, racial tension, especially. I mean, we're in the city of Atlanta, and our campuses are throughout the city of Atlanta. And then, of course, all the political things that are going on. And I'm hearing it from pastors all the time. And we're all kind of looking for a solution. But unfortunately, it's probably a tension that we manage rather than a problem to be solved. So, yeah.
So, I mean, certainly all three of those issues that you mentioned coming together in one season is unique. But we've dealt with social unrest. We've dealt with political disruptions. We've dealt with these things in the past. Is there anything else that might be distinctive about today?
Yeah, social media. Right? I mean, you know, for a generation, it seems like it's been here forever. For us, it is still considered a relatively new thing in terms of not just the existence of social media, but the impact of social media on culture and on relationships. I remember when, Carlos Whitaker introduced me to Twitter, and I'm like, wow, I can send out these positive messages to, hundreds or thousands of people, all at the same time. What a great idea. And then people, kind of treated it like Instagram. And now, it's just I can't even say, on your podcast what it is. It's just become a mess. But again, social media, not just Twitter, Facebook, and, Instagram still feels positive and happy for the most part till you read the comments. But yeah, now everybody has a microphone. Everybody has an opinion, and everybody has misinformation, and everybody's a victim of, every cognitive bias, confirmation bias, all those things. So yeah, that has, it's increased the volume, and it's decreased, it seems, the IQ of the conversations, I feel like.
So I don't know if people realize, but the communities where North Point is located, 8 different locations now, have become very diverse through the years. And I have to think it's become challenging to try to engage those diverse communities with the mission that the church is on. How has that dynamic shifted through the years?
Well, the good news is all of our campuses have become more diverse in terms of attenders. That's a good thing. And that's never really been a problem, honestly. And we've not chased diversity. I mean, I love being involved in those conversations, but at the end of the day, people go to a local church because it's a local church, and they go to the church that's local. So churches eventually look like their community in terms of aging, in terms of, again, racial diversity. I mean, everything. That just happens. And, you know this, who people want to see themselves, so who we put at the doors, who we put on the stages, all that's super important. But the difference now, back kind of to the first question, is in Atlanta, there's actually a city, the city of Decatur, that has traditionally leaned very far left politically. We have a church in Forsyth County that has a very, very difficult racial history, and it's about 85% Republican. So once upon a time, none of that really mattered. I mean, Jesus is Jesus, and the Bible's the Bible, and we're Christians, and we have so much in common that those, the differences, they didn't divide. But with all the division within culture, and specifically even in our city, or any really metro area, people come to church with, their guard up, or people come to church with their new informed opinion, and people come to church with their politics on the front burner. We'll talk about that, I hope, a little bit later. And suddenly, those filters, whether it's the COVID, it's the vaccine filter, the COVID filter, the political filter, the racial, all these filters now are sitting right in front of people, and all my message, not just mine, but, we're talking about our churches, my sermons are being filtered through multiple filters, and are you saying that? And I think he's saying that, and I heard him say, and it just becomes so complicated, almost to the point of being discouraging. I'm not discouraged, but again, my assistant Diane, she jokes because we get attacked from both sides, and she's like, if we could get both sides in the room together, they would be like, wait, I thought he was on your side. Well, I thought he was on your side, because we're not trying to take sides, but of course people in all three of those arenas want us to be more overt and more outspoken and take a stand and be on their side. And for the pastors that you and I talk to who are trying to get this right, they know better than to take sides. But if you don't take a side, if you don't take a side of the givers and the influencers in the church, they feel like you've taken a side against them. So it has become very challenging. I've never experienced anything like it.
Yeah. So then I was going to ask, because of the diversity in the different communities where North Point's located, does that make it harder or easier for you to accomplish your mission as a church?
It makes me, and this is probably a good thing, I am more sensitized to what I don't want to accidentally say, or I don't want to accidentally say it in a way that's accidentally offensive. So I do more of bringing people in. If I think a message is going to be somewhat controversial or could be taken the wrong way, I'll bring people from our staff that I think are part of the demographic that could take it the wrong way and say, hey, here's the outline, let's talk about it, I want to get this right. In terms of our mission to attract unchurched people or to engage unchurched people with the gospel, I don't know if it's more difficult or not. What makes it more difficult for some is the pre-existing bias against church in general, and especially against large churches in general. That's always been there. And perhaps the division in culture has made that more of an obstacle. I don't know. But, if kind of our line is we want to create churches unchurched people love to attend, and we want to engage unchurched people with the gospel. And so that means, in our verses from Acts 15, that let's not make it difficult. Let's not make it difficult for people who are turning to God. Well, the way you don't make it difficult is you remove every unnecessary obstacle. Mm-hmm. And I think there are new obstacles that, partly because of my generation and partly because of my habit and the rhythm of our church, I think we're constantly identifying perhaps new obstacles that we need to be sensitive to if we're really committed to being the kind of church we say we are. So, in an environment like this, you learn a lot, you make a lot of mistakes, and you just try to keep your eye on the ball. I guess we're supposed to fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, and keep moving forward. And then every once in a while, to stop and think back about where we've come from, and then just the history of the church in general, and realize, oh no, we still have it easy. We don't have any real problems. Or we just look at the persecuted church around the world today and realize, okay, this is a tension, this is a challenge, but hey, we still got a lot of running room, and we don't really have any reason to complain.
Absolutely. Well, you kind of alluded to this, but around COVID guidelines, around politics, it sounds like over the last number of months, you've been kind of receiving thoughts and challenges
thoughts
from both
is a
sides.
nice way of putting it. Yeah, we've received some.
And I get it. I mean, even in my family, I have people in my family watching two different news channels, and so I'm getting it from both sides. But I can't imagine, as a pastor of a church like North Point. So how are you receiving this, and how are you responding?
Well, I take it personally, and I think I take it appropriately personally, because honestly, I don't want anyone to leave our church, and especially during this season. And again, this is the new part. When people leave because of a variety of reasons, there are a variety of people leaving for a variety of reasons. But this is the first time a lot of people have chosen to leave for the same reason. And the disturbing thing is it has nothing to do with theology. It has nothing to do with the mission of the church or the style of worship or, again, any of the environments, any of the things you would normally complain about. For us, especially when we decided not to meet early on in the pandemic, and then once again kind of kept kicking the can around to basically our Sunday morning worship services, we didn't do those for almost a year. During that time, people read into that a narrative, a political narrative. And so I got voicemails, direct messages, calls. People came to the office to tell me they were leaving, and I appreciated them letting me know. And I called all of them that I could find a phone number for. And my assistant, Diane, knew, don't even tell Andy until I've already tracked down the number. And the reason I called is because these were people involved in our church for 5, 10, 15 years. And when I would call, first I had to convince them it was really me, and that was fun. And then they would tell me how much they loved the church. I mean, they just, the trigger response was, we've loved the church. First time I could get my husband to come. The kids love it. And then they remembered, oh yeah, we're leaving. Okay, and then we would settle in, and it would become political. 100% of the time, it wasn't we miss church. It was we don't trust why you have decided to close Sunday morning worship services, and it became political, and that was discouraging. And I made sure these conversations always ended on a positive note, and some families have come back. A couple of folks have written to apologize. Others just found other churches, and because it was, I would end friendly. On 2 or 3 occasions, I said, okay, so let me get this straight. So that you're going to go to a different church now, are you going to make an appointment with the pastor ahead of time and ask him or her what his or her political persuasion is. I mean, this now is the new litmus test. You're not leaving because of theology or teaching or preaching or the Bible. You're leaving because, you don't feel like I'll take a political stand. So that means that's top of mind. That's the number one filter for you. So, and I would kid. So you're going to make it, and they would laugh. I'm like, well, sounds to me like you need to know where those churches are politically if you're going to put your family there. And again, it would, appropriately awkward, and we'd end on friendly terms. But I would get off those calls or walk out of sometimes those long meetings and just think, wow, here's a family that has invested in our church, has benefited from our church, has served in our church, given to the church, and because of, stop me if I'm going too long, not because of something I said in a sermon, but something they wanted to hear me say that I wouldn't say. And I would say, hey, what, and I told you this earlier, I would say, what is it you wish I would say in a sermon that would make you feel like you could stay? And no one can ever answer that question. And I would say, what have you heard me say that makes you think that I've bought into some, party, platform and that their church is moving in a different direction? Because that's what they would say. We feel like the church is moving in a different direction. I'd say, help me understand why. And the closest thing I got was after the George Floyd's death, like anybody paying attention, you respond to something like that. So we hit pause on a series and developed a whole sermon around that event and our response and what it should be. And 2 or 3, folks in our church felt like I called them a racist during that message. Because in the message, I said something along the lines that there's probably a little racism in all of us. And as Jesus followers, we need to surface that, acknowledge that. But they were so offended that I would insinuate that there might be racism in there. Well, this is just discipleship, right? Isn't this, look in the mirror, cleanse your heart, But they were out. So that's new and that's challenging. And, that's the world we live in.
Yeah. So I think what I hear you saying then is North Point is still a church that unchurched people love to attend.
I hope so.
But maybe not some churched people?
Well, that's a good point. And actually, full disclosure, you attend here. So, and we were talking earlier, you are actually working in our guest services area, and you commented on how many new families.
It's really amazing how many new families I'm seeing walk in the door every Sunday. And many times it's people moving from different areas or experiencing something in their life, a crisis of some sort, where they just recognize, I need church.
Yep.
And they're coming to the doors of North Point.
Bringing their kids, yeah.
And it's just been phenomenal. I've really been surprised. I thought on this side of COVID, what we would experience is church people coming back.
Right.
But what I'm seeing is just brand new people.
Yep. And we're seeing that at all of our Atlanta area campuses. So, this is a little bit different topic, so we pulled me back in. But essentially, it appears to me, and I think this is true of a lot of larger churches, not just us, there's a group of people who were marginally active that have disappeared because they weren't engaged. There's a group of people who, in culture, who are asking deeper questions, and they're dealing with things they've never dealt with before because of a variety of reasons, and they're looking up. I mean, that was what Jesus said. He said, let your light shine in such a way that people see your good deeds and then look up and glorify your Father in heaven. And so, fortunately, when they think about church, whatever our reputation is in our communities, it's good enough to where they're like, well, let's try that one. Well, that's a win for us. I mean, and refusing to be political keeps the doors open to people of all political persuasions. And this is one of the things that honestly just drove me nuts during the last presidential political cycle, was watching pastors essentially say to half the population in the country, you're not welcome here, because they were so politically aligned. So I think that's not a good stewardship of influence. So we've tried to stay, down the middle. And what's funny, and you'll get this, because I talk to our congregation about standing in the middle. I say in the middle is where problems are solved. In the middle is where life experiences are shared. In the middle is where you go, oh, I always thought, or I assumed, but in the middle. And so, people on the far right, Christians, to your point of some Christians don't love our church, whenever I say middle, they hear compromise. Oh, you're lukewarm. I'm like, that's not what we're talking about. I actually took, this bit of a paradigm from, I think it was Letters from a Birmingham Jail that Dr. King wrote. I've read so many things. But I think it was in that letter that he talked about if you stand in the middle, you get shot at from both sides. And he talked about, in his case, there was a group of black activists that said we need to protest at night and we need to bring violence to violence. And then, of course, there were southern white people who are like, you need to go back to Boston, where you came from. You have no business here. It's not your issue. And he's like, I'm not leaving, and we're not going to be violent. And so he was criticized from both sides. And I remember reading that thinking, that is somewhat of a litmus test in terms of, are you where you need to be in culture? But not only that, Tony, when you read the Gospels, Jesus, everybody was trying to bait Jesus into their side of every debate, right? Should we pay taxes? Shouldn't we? It was constant. And Jesus, this is so powerful, and I think this is so instructive for the local church. Jesus didn't even give us any suggestions or solutions for anything in society, not one. He never even addressed society's problems. 100% of the time, he did two things. 100% of the time, he addressed issues of the heart, and he met immediate needs. This was his pattern. That's the pattern of the church. And the moment the church gets out of the heart business into the legislation business, the election business, we have lost our mandate. I mean, think about this, and we can go to the next question. Jesus had personal interaction with 2 tax collectors and never addressed the unjust tax system. And at the end of the day, one of them changed the way he collected taxes, and the other one changed careers and joined Jesus. So, because his issue was the heart of Zacchaeus and the heart of Matthew, and there are so many examples of this. In fact, if you read the Gospels through that lens, he skips over the political, social issues of the day and just addresses the heart of the people right in front of him. Then he turns right around and meets the immediate need of people who had been unjustly treated by the system, and yet he never addresses the system. I think that's the model for the church, which means we can't allow ourselves to be dragged into political debate. When we do, we step down from what we've been called to do, and we get in this murky middle where there's just never going to be 100% agreement. And honestly, we don't really know what we're talking about half the time because of the way we've been educated and the culture, or the cultural implications of some of those political decisions, or even decisions as it relates to law. So I think the model is there in the Gospels, but staying true to that has never been more difficult.
And of course, the irony of all this is when you choose a political side, whichever side it is, right, you think the other side needs more Jesus in their lives.
Exactly.
And you're actually pushing people further away from that.
Well, since you brought that up, I know some of the men, they were all men, who aligned publicly with Donald Trump, pastors I'm talking about, and church leaders, and Christian organizational leaders. And I got invited so many times, to have pictures and go to Trump Tower and all that, and I resisted. I'm very conservative politically, very. But I thought, wait a minute, you are essentially saying to half the country, you're not welcome at my church. You're not welcome in my organization. I couldn't understand it. And again, to the point you just made, if I can just, argue the Republican side of this just a minute, Republicans in general think most Democrats are lost, immoral, socialist. I mean, that's the group that needs Jesus. So we're going to align politically with the right and essentially uninvite them to our churches, but they're the group that we feel like is the mission field. I mean, am I missing what? So even, and I don't agree with this, even if the characterization of Democrats is what so many Republicans made it, if that's true, it's not true, but if it's true, all the more reason not to align your church politically with the right. And the same goes for the left. If you feel like the Republicans are heartless, Christless, godless, they don't care about people, all the more reason not to so align your church with the left that no one from the right is willing to show up. I'm a simple person. I just don't understand that way of thinking, but I don't think it's a way of thinking. I think it was a reaction to what was happening in culture, and they got baited into a debate that Jesus would have stayed out of, that we have unfortunately stepped into.
So Andy, I've talked with so many pastors over these last number of months, and it's really been discouraging because I'm hearing so many stories of pastors that are losing good friends, good friendships, close friendships, because those close friends have now left the church and left the friendship too. And so it's just discouraging for me to see so many people now choosing church based on political leanings. And I have to think the long-term ramifications of this just can't be good. But I mean, what do we tell pastors when they're facing this and they're losing these friendships?
Well, I've had these conversations like you have, and I've just told them, you're doing the right thing. This is not a problem you can solve. This is a tension you're going to have to manage, and you are going to have to stay right in the middle. And the moment you decide I'm going to relieve some pressure and speak more left or speak more right or lead more left or lead more right, there will be an initial pressure that comes off of you. But there's going to be a brand new pressure because there are people in your church, and I'm learning this. There are people in your church who are so grateful that you've not done that. And the moment you do, you're going to hear from them, and you're going to think, oh no, these are the more perhaps thoughtful people. These are the people who come to church for the sake of the gospel and want a church that's easier to invite their friends to, left or right. So oftentimes our fans or our friends are silent because they don't know the pressure we're under. And it's it's sometimes the noisy minority or the people who have direct access to us that we hear from. So I just am saying to pastors, hey, you're doing this right. If you're being criticized from both sides for not taking a stand, Jonathan Reckford, who's CEO of Habitat for Humanity, is a friend. They're located here in Atlanta. And years ago, the first time I met him, I think, he told me this. He said, Andy, when people tell you they want you to take a stand, what they're really saying is they want you to take their stand. If you're not going to take their stand, they don't want you to take a stand. So when I addressed this specific issue this past summer to all of our churches, and I said, for those of you who want us to take a stand, here it is. This is our stand. We're standing right in the middle. That is our stand. So if that's okay, great. If you're not comfortable with that, and the context was Philippians chapter 2, that Jesus came to be a servant. Jesus gave his life. He never powered up. He never played the God card. He did not come into this world to win. He came into this world to lose. And the moment the church begins to play to win, we have already lost, because the only way to win in this world is to adapt the instruments or the methods of the kingdoms of this world. And this is why all these crazy lawsuits and churches going to war with, their cities and their city councils. I just sat back and thought, what are you doing? You have just stepped in it, and you are leveraging the tools and the weapons of the kingdoms of this world to further the cause of Christ. Jesus didn't do it. I mean, imagine this. Jesus was a victim of an unjust legal system that had been unduly influenced by lobbyists from the temple. And he still didn't complain about the system. In fact, he's in front of Pilate, and this is his big opportunity. Are you a king? And Jesus' response to Pilate is, Pilate, you are not as in charge as you think you are. I am only here because one above you has given you permission for this. And again, he doesn't address the system. He addresses Pilate. Well, that's the model. And again, Jesus even gave us the theology for this. He said, for out of the heart comes, and then he makes a list: slander and sexual immorality, and all these things. Look at the list. Every single, in fact, I'm soon going to say this in one of our churches, that every single thing you don't like about the United States of America, every single thing you don't like about culture is on that list. And Jesus says it comes from the heart. So why in the world would we drop below the line we've been called to address anything but the heart if all of these things ultimately issue from the heart? And that's the call of the local church, is to address the heart of men and women, rather than drop down into a realm where we're just going to be used, we're going to become a voting block, we're going to become a constituency, we're going to be wined and dined and bribed. And for the body of Christ to allow itself to be used by either side politically, again, we've lost our voice, and ultimately we've lost our opportunity to become the conscience of the nation. Because for us to be the conscience of the nation, we have to stand above politics and speak to the heart of people on both sides. And I just feel like what we've just come through, we've lost some of that opportunity.
Well, let's continue to get on the solution side of this if we can. And I want to go to, Paul was dealing with a very divided church in Corinth, and he challenged us. We need to agree with one another. We need to see no division in the church. We need to be perfectly united in mind and thought. Help us as pastors and church leaders consider, how do we get on the solution side of this so that we're seeing unity within the church again?
Great question. Step number one, we have to help the people in our church identify the enemy. The enemy of the local church is division, period. That's the enemy. Anything that facilitates division is the enemy. Anything that facilitates unity is our friend. And the reason I say that, and this is amazing, John 17, the high priestly prayer, Jesus prays for his disciples, and he prays that they would be one, Father, even as we are one. And he's not talking about some intangible, ethereal thing. He's talking about one in purpose. Read it in context. He's like, Father, Father, since you sent me to do your will, I'm sending them out to do my will. I pray that they would be one, even as we are one in purpose. And then he says, and I not only pray for them, but I pray for those who will believe in the future because of their testimony. And then twice in that prayer, he says, and here's why I'm praying for oneness, so that the world will know that you have sent me. To be right on the money in terms of people understanding that God sent Jesus is not our perfect theology or a worship style. To be right on the nose to help the world understand that God sent Jesus is our unity, period. Jesus could have prayed for anything else for future generations of his followers. He prayed for unity. So when a local church understands, you know what? Enemy number one, disunity. They will be unified, they'll have a voice, and they will be able to make a difference in the culture and in their communities. But where there is division, it is game over. And the fact that we've allowed politicians and politics, nobody's going to die and go to Washington, D.C., fortunately, right? And you know what else? All these people that have politicized their churches, when one of their children is sick, suddenly it's God, whatever, suddenly God's back on the throne. Jesus is back on the throne. So, we have the opportunity of a lifetime. And I feel like 2020, this is just my opinion. I don't have anything to back this up but my opinion. I feel like 2020 was the opportunity of a generation for the church, and we missed it because we were afraid of losing. We're afraid of losing our religious liberty. We're afraid of losing power. We're afraid. And it's like, what was Jesus' primary command in the Gospels? Fear not, fear not. And they actually had something to fear. Our fear caused us to leave our mandate, to drop below that line, to get involved in things we should not be involved in, and we lost our opportunity to speak into those things. And we'll recover, but it's going to take a while. So to point of your question, for the pastor out there, help your churches identify the enemy. It is not the Democrats. It is not the Republicans. It is not state and local government. The enemy is division. That's what Jesus prayed that we would never give into, because he knew at the end of the day, if we're divided, the world will not have a clear picture of who he is and who sent him.
So with that in mind, let's talk specifically about the teaching that pastors are doing on Sundays. Does anything need to shift related to that in order to continue to produce the unity that we're pursuing? Again,
you're asking me, so this is my opinion. It is so clear. When Jesus met with his apostles right before he's going to be arrested for that final Passover, two very, very, very significant things happened. Number one, he said, I'm giving you a new command. They didn't need any new commands, but this wasn't to add to existing commands. This was the new command that was to be the marching orders for the church. You are to love one another, not as you love your neighbor. No, we're done with that. This is a whole new thing. You are to love one another the way that I have loved you. You are to take your cue from me personally in terms of how you treat other people, period. And then he says, and by this, people will know that you're my disciples. It is so simple. It is so clear. The second thing that happened that same night, and I don't even know the emotion to wrap around this because it's so cultural. In ancient times, wealthy people or even moderately wealthy people had house servants or slaves. And the low slave on the totem pole was the slave that did foot care. They would call it foot care for their master, which means you bring the sandals, you lace the sandals, you wash the feet. In first century times, a rabbi who had disciples like Jesus would expect his disciples to serve him, but disciples never did foot care. This was for the lowliest of the low. So they're having the Passover meal. When Jesus stands up, takes off that rabbinic robe, wraps that towel around his waist, and begins washing their feet. This was more disturbing than we even have words for. He wasn't just serving them. He was doing what they would not do for each other, and that they would not even do for him. He went as low as he could possibly go. And I think you could have heard a pin drop. And it takes a long time to wash 12 pairs of feet. And to the point of this question, he washed Judas' feet, knowing that night what was about to happen. And then he gets up, unwraps that towel, puts his rabbinic robe back on, sits down in the seat of honor, and he says, as I've washed your feet, look around this table, you are to wash one another's feet. Otherwise, you will declare yourself greater than me, and I am your master. He says, I am your Lord, and I am your teacher. And as I have washed your feet, you wash one another's feet. In other words, you go as low as you can go for the people around you. That's the model. So here's the command. You love as I've loved you. How have I loved you? Watch this. And if you think that's love, wait till tomorrow. I'm going to put on a demonstration of love. It'll take your breath away, take my life away, and take your sin away. So in terms of our preaching and teaching, and this is why you attend our church, it's why I'm sure you think, Andy, why does every sermon go back to the new command? Because it is central, and in times of division, the way that you address division is not telling people don't be divided. It's by drawing them back to what's essential and what's central. And Jesus made it clear, by this all men will know that you're my disciple. How? The way you treat one another, not the way you believe about me.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. I think it's a challenge for us in the church because we have big media, we have social media, and the more and more we learn, they're just trying to create passionate division on both sides because when they do that, it grows their audience and they make more money.
Right.
But for the church, it just seems it's so hard to break through that noise. So how do we do that? How do we break through the noise when we're up against that?
Well, what you just said is the beginning. And I don't know why, maybe just because we've lived longer than some people, I don't know, why people can't see that media outlets exist to make money. They do not exist to make America great. They don't exist. They exist to make money, and that's okay. It's free enterprise, capitalism, all for it. Make all the money you can. But the average American by now should be like, talking points. There is profit in division, and there is great profit in fear. I mean, you leverage fear, you can raise a lot of money. And so the cycle, it's so predictable. Why can't we see through it? And it goes like this. You have an enemy. I'm going to protect you from that enemy. Give me some money. You have an enemy. I do. Yes, you didn't even know you had an enemy. Let me tell you what this enemy is going to do to you and your family. Now I'm scared. Fear not. I'm here for you for $25 or $50 or $100. It's like, why can we not see through that? And again, step back into our New Testament ethic that but includes fear not. So I think in terms of preaching, teaching, messaging, people need to, at least we should take the opportunity to say what people kind of already know, that this is, okay, they're leveraging your fear and confusion for their benefit. It's not benefiting you or me. I mean, how many presidents have we had? I mean, we've been through this so many times. So I think sometimes just exposing the reality of it helps people keep it in context. But until we do, we're victims of our own fear, and we play right into their hands. And I'm all for supporting candidates. Donate to candidates. Vote your Christ-informed, your law of Christ-informed conscience. We should be politically active. But when it comes to where the church stands, again, we're supposed to be the conscience of the nation. So,
all right. So my kids, I don't know where they got this, and frankly, Andy, I don't think I want to know where they got this. But periodically, they'll say to each other, "That's your opinion, and that's fine, but you're wrong, and I hate you." Now, I don't think they actually hate each other. I think they're just trying to be funny, and they still love each other. But this is a very real thing in our world. I mean, people disagreeing with each other, not just disagreeing, but then it goes to hatred, and then that person becomes my enemy. And I think this is especially challenging for us in the church world because we actually do believe in a truth, that there is right and wrong in this world. So what do we do with all of that?
Well, again, Jesus was so clear. He said, all right, there's problems. So how are we going to solve this problem? Step number 1, look in the mirror. When there's something about you that bothers me, I'm supposed to look in the mirror, not at you. And I look in the mirror and I realize, ooh, I got some of that in me. So I'm going to take the log out of my eye, and I love what Jesus said. Of course, it's so brilliant. He said, when you take the log out of your eye, you will see more clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So when we're disturbed by behavior, outside the church, inside the church, unchurched people, church people, whatever it might be, Jesus has said, step number 1, you look in the mirror and you ask, is there any of that in me? And God, help me take the log out of my eye, not so that I'll be a better person than you, so that I love it, see clearly. We need to see clearly, and we see clearly when we look in the mirror, ask God to examine our hearts and get in a place where we can have a sane conversation with the people that we're not trying to convince, people we're trying to help. Again, this is where follow Jesus through the Gospels. The woman at the well, perfect example. He shows up, he's Jewish, she's Samaritan, we all know the story. And she tries to get into a theological worship war, debate with him about how are the Jews worship? The Jews do this, Samaritans do that, And Jesus is so horrible, insensitive, and brilliant. Jesus responds, go get your husband. Do what? Go get your husband. And he goes right to her heart. And he touches the shame, and then he's not done. She says, well, I don't have a husband. He says, I know, you've had 5. And suddenly we're not talking about the Jews and the Samaritans and where do we worship and how do we worship. Suddenly he just goes right to her heart because that's why he came. And that is our role, not to shame people. But people can't deal with their shame until they face their shame. And Jesus, I wouldn't try it. Jesus, he drags it all out, not to shame her, but to diminish her shame. And of course, she becomes the evangelist in her city. So there is a way forward. And again, Jesus models this for us over and over. And then the Apostle Paul comes along and, states it and kind of teases it out in terms of specific behaviors and specific responses. So the way forward is there. And as preachers and teachers and church leaders, we've just got to help people fix their eyes on that, wrap their emotions around it, and respond accordingly.
Andy, I tend to be more of a realist than an optimist, which, if you think about it, is an optimistic way of calling me a pessimist, but I'm not sure how that works. But anyways, over this last year and a half, I can't explain it, but I've thought this could be a real moment for the church. I think our message could be disruptive in a good way. Do you think I have reason to have hope?
Yeah, because nobody likes the division except the people who profit from it, right? But the people who profit from it have the mailing list and the microphones. Yeah. But there are multiple, people in culture who are saying this, let's move toward the middle. Because again, the middle is where problems are solved. The middle is where life experiences are shared. The middle is where we go, oh, I didn't know. So yeah, there's hope. And if the church will step back into its role as people who serve immediate needs immediately, because everybody wants to, people appreciate that as well, and speak to issues and matters of the heart and create a safe place for people from all political persuasions to come together, it's the opportunity of a lifetime. In fact, it may be our greatest opportunity, again, because where else will people from different sides of the political aisle be able to come together and do anything together and have conversations? I mean, entertainment, you're with your friends, you come and you go with your friends. But in the church, again, that's the format. That's the opportunity. And again, so many pastors are getting this right, and they're getting beat up for it, but they're just locked in. I'm just not moving to the left or the right. And they all have political opinions. They all vote one way or the other, which we should all do. But in terms of the atmosphere and the tone of the church, it needs to be politic-free so that, again, we can address the issues through the filter of Scripture. And kind of one last thing on this. Tony, one of the things that makes this so hard for all of us, for you, for me, for any of us who have an opinion about anything, and we all pretty much have an opinion about everything. I do, Sandra says. The thing that makes it difficult is it's very difficult as an American, especially in a political cycle, to keep my faith filter ahead of my political filter. And every single person watching or listening or who hears me say this, I know what they think. They think, well, I do have my faith filter ahead of my political filter. It's why I'm a Republican. I do have my faith filter ahead of my political filter. It's why I'm a Democrat. So this is very difficult for us to get right. But when we step back into the new covenant command of Jesus, that goes so far as to say you are to love your enemy. When I can't love my enemy, when I can't speak well of my enemy, when I'm unwilling to find common ground with an enemy or a political opponent or somebody who doesn't see the world the way I do, clearly my faith filter is not my first filter. So again, when we hold our behavior up beside Jesus' new covenant command, when we hold our behavior up against what happened when he washed their feet, when we hold our behavior up against, hey, look in the mirror before you look at your friend's problem, then we discover whose we really are and what's actually most important.
Andy, final question today. I know I've had conversations with a lot of pastors that are discouraged. Many, in fact, just kind of questioning, this isn't the ministry I signed up for. Do I still want to do this?
It's not fun anymore.
What encouragement would you give pastors that are wrestling with that call to ministry again because of the season that we've been through?
Well, the pastors who feel that are probably exactly where they ought to be. Because, dirty little secret, during the last political cycle in particular, presidential voting for president, this last cycle, the pastors, and again, I'm so oriented to the right, that's who I pay the most attention to. The pastors who leverage their church for the sake of being able to make big, broad political statements, they loved it. They loved it right up until the point that Donald Trump lost. And then they did not know what to do with it. The rest of us who refused to go there felt the tension. So I would say to the pastors, if you're feeling that tension, you are probably right where you need to be, and stay there. This is for such a time as this moment, and ultimately, more Americans want the tension to go away and want the division to go away. And we are called to stay firm, and I think ultimately, I hate to say it'll pay off, I don't know what the payoff is, but ultimately that's what faithfulness and faithful ministry looks like right now. And so that's what we're called to do. And I do think in the end, it sets us up to have more influence, but even if it doesn't, even if nothing positive comes from that, again, follow Jesus through the Gospels. He's going to Jerusalem to die, and they're like, no, you're not going to die. He's like, no, we're going there to do this on purpose. I'm turning myself in. I'm going to lose on purpose so the world can win. Well, there are times in the life of pastors and Christians where you walk toward Jerusalem because it's the thing to do, and you just trust God that on the other side something good will come about either in your lifetime or maybe in the future. But faithfulness in this, for pastors right now, I believe, is staying the course, fixing our eyes on Jesus, trying to help the people in our church, regardless of their political suasion, to fix their eyes on Jesus and to allow him to shape our behavior and shape our responses to the world around us. And then if Jesus is correct, and I always believe Jesus is correct, we will let our light shine in such a way that people will see our good deeds and ultimately look up and glorify our Father in heaven.
Wow, Tony, what an interview. My head's just spinning right now with everything that was shared. But one of the things that really stood out to me, maybe makes me sad, just maybe the opportunity that we missed, as the church. And yet I also love the hope that we'll be fine. God's still leading his church, but so much wisdom, and really that the news wants to make money was an eye opener too.
Yeah, for sure.
But anyways, I wanted to hear from you, Tony, just what stood out from you in that interview with Andy?
Yeah, here my thought as we were talking was, unity is really countercultural. It's in today's culture, it's just It's not what the culture expects anymore. And I think this may be the real opportunity for the church. It's certainly a real opportunity for those of us that call ourselves believers, because this was Jesus' prayer for us. This is, and Andy alluded to this in the conversation. He was speaking specifically about Jesus' prayer, which is outlined in John 17. And in part of that prayer, Jesus says this: I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I and them, and you and me. And this is the key part, as far as I'm concerned, so that they may be brought to complete unity. And then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them, even as you have loved me. And so there's this direct connect that Jesus makes in this prayer between us being unified as a body of believers and the world knowing. And so we have to be unified in order for us to have great impact in the mission that God's called us to. And so as leaders, as pastors, I think we need to be praying for unity in our churches. And then I think we need to take the initiative to continue to keep this in front of our congregations, so that we are staying together, so that we are pulling together, so that we are staying unified and can really accomplish the mission that God's called us to.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. And if you're anything like me, I can't wait to watch that interview again. There's so many things in there that I need to be thinking about, especially with our church and with all the churches that we serve. I just appreciate the way that Andy, I believe, has just heard from the Lord and what he shared with us. So we'll try to get that out in the next couple of days. We'll email you a link so that you can replay that webinar. And also we'll try to answer some of the questions you submitted that we weren't able to answer live today during the webinar. And if you think of others, by the way, feel free to submit them on social media using hashtag UnstuckChurch, or you can email them to us at help@theunstuckgroup.com. And lastly, before you go, let me just remind you that Tony and I engage directly with churches like yours each week by providing consulting services around the topics like the ones that we covered today. As an example, we can help you and your team clarify your mission and clarify your vision for the future. This is foundational for your church to experience unity going forward. So if you're interested in learning more, we'd love to talk to you, and you can connect with us at theunstuckgroup.com/start. Have a great day. Thanks again for joining us.